Hi, everyone. This is the working group workload-aware scheduling. And we have two action items or two agenda items. So let me share my screen and then we can start. Let me know if you have any problem seeing my screen. Otherwise, Kevin.
Yeah, I can go ahead. I will, sorry, I forgot. I don't know if I have the host access to this one. Can I get access to share?
You can, of course. Let me know if you can share now.
Yep. All right. So I gave this presentation to Working Group Batch like 2 hours ago. I'll skip ahead I want to focus more on the job set side for this one. Uh, I kind of wanted to basically, this group probably knows a lot. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Am I not sharing? No.
You are sharing. I can
Am,
see
am,
your screen.
am I sharing a
The
slides?
the slides, yes.
Okay. So, yeah, for this group, I think we all kind of agree we're sort of working towards an idea in a world where the true workload controllers kind of have a spec defining scheduling. Part of what I did for Working Group Batch was kind of highlight what is going on and trying to think through like the queue integration. What I want to talk about here is I've been kind of working on the job set side, just kind of proving this one out. And I can give a quick demo kind of showing it, and we can talk a little bit about the design if we want. So I'll skip. But yeah, basically, I really just wanted to try and say, can I use like what we're kind of planning for the job controller and basically add this into job set? I know we don't have the workload builder API, but someone pointed out to me that we can use the V1 Alpha 3 API for the scheduler. So this does mean like this dependency is I am testing on 1.37 kind cluster with 1.37 APIs and trying to kind of see if I can build the job set uh, work right now. But yeah, basically this kind of really is pretty much what we were describing in the KEP. I wanted to, in this case, I'm thinking the driver and the workers are all gang scheduled together. So the gang policy kind of defaults the min count so that the driver and workers are just an overall gang. Uh, Wanted to kind of I think there was a call out in the KEP about how this could work for sorry, this is the workload builder KEP. I wanted to kind of take that and actually implement some of these ideas in JobSet to see what would work. Good news is mostly it does. Uh, but basically we have this concept of replicated job policies. So we kind of want to be able to specify gangs per the replicated jobs. I guess the one thing I am realizing, thinking about this more, I need to find out from people that actually use JobSet whether or not we want gangs per replica. Because right now, what I'm assuming is all of the replicas of a worker plus the parallelisms would be considered one gang. I don't know if we want like each replica of a replicated job to be going to a different rack or to be gang scheduled separately. That's one thing I guess I need to think about. If anyone has any thoughts there, please let me know. And yeah, kind of similar one. An idea for the pod groups. Kind of wanted to showcase how this could be done. And yeah, again, we're just kind of leveraging the API. So I want to switch to kind of a demo showing how this is working. I'm going to switch my terminal.
So Kevin, Matt and Andrea, they have their hands up.
Okay.
This,
Yeah.
you can continue with the demo and like we can have questions at the end or whatever you prefer.
Sure. Andre, how do you feel?
Yeah, I just need to drop in 23 minutes, so if we can do it quick, that would be great. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Do you want to quickly show the demo first, then we can maybe ask quick questions?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, I mean, it's gonna show it all working. So for what I have is just kind of a simple, small baby use case of the scheduling policy, driver and workers all scheduled together, and then did I create it? Yeah, you can see here I have the pod groups are actually getting created by job, and then if I delete the job set, it should actually, oh, hopefully I haven't tested this. Yeah, it should delete the pod groups, and that's part of the life cycle. But yeah, generally, the good news is this all kind of works. I did draft a KEP to kind of walk through. So if anyone has questions of the design, I wanted to kind of start that conversation. I'll share that, but I'll link it here actually. But honestly, you all drafted a lot of this, so we all kind of know what's going on. So I'm fine to discuss now if we all want. Go on, Matt. Or actually, sorry, let Andre go first since he has to drop it.
Yes, yeah, sure. Yeah, I think this is great. Like, a couple of thoughts. I think on your question regarding pod group per replica. So it's part of train job. I know some guys from Google came in terms of multi-slice CPU placing, and I know they've done some. They even added some examples how you can place the every replica on the TPU slice. So I would imagine we might have a use cases when you want to separate pod groups per replica, right? Um, Yeah, so we kind of need to consider, I guess, this one as part of the integration. We definitely need some feedback from TPU folks on your proposal. And I know we already have a few examples how that might look like. Do we have anyone here on the call from Google who actually can clarify this?
For TPUs, like I have some context, and you are right. So basically, you would like to have a separate pod group per job, per like in the replicated jobs, because that's how we'll be implementing like the TPU scheduling. But in general, I don't think it's a good approach to combine multiple different controllers into a single pod group, because eventually, I believe like we'll start something like next cycle. We want to start dealing with the runtime failure handling, right? And for that, it's actually better to keep the unit as small as possible, because then you can have some integration between scheduler and the actual controller like job, right? Where scheduler can give you some signals like, I'm not able to schedule any more pods in this topology, right? So controller should have this information and potentially make a decision to reschedule the whole object, right? So like overall, if we start combining multiple different controllers, like instances, right, here into a single pod group, then it will be hard to implement like those future features, and also like things like TPUs. Probably we'll find some others, and especially like with CPG, this is like no longer needed, right? Because you can model the hierarchy and basically follow what you have in controller. It is like multi-level, like job set or train job. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think so. The point is like we might need to extend API to support target replica. Like, we have a target replicated job as the indicator, right? But we don't have a way to target a specific replica, right, within this group.
Please define the replica here. Like, what do you mean by replica?
So target replicated jobs today support replicas, and every replica will create a separate job with the parallelism and completions. So from my understanding, in TPU multi-slice, you place all of those jobs in a different domain, which means like you need to kind of separate them by the domain, right, within the single replicated job.
You are saying you might want to have different settings for different like job replicas within the same.
Within the same replicated job. Yeah.
Okay. So I know like for multi-slice we even want more, and I think the current idea is to do that on the job level. So in that case, like the job will model ideally into a CPG that contains like multiple pod groups. and you can say like the first 16 pods of the job are the first pod group, the next 16 are the second pod group, and so on. So, but like overall, this is like to be TBD, like to be designed, to be decided. We are like starting with something, but yeah.
Yeah, but I guess
So
please
I
go.
think that. Sorry, Andre, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I think that this was some feedback I got from the Q team also about, because what I don't think I'm hearing from you, Matt, is we probably want at the job level the control for the job should be creating its kind of own pod groups for replacement and TPU placement, which we may not want to specify fully in the job set approach.
This is like a separate discussion who should be responsible for creating the runtime objects, because like when we only have two levels, basically it can work both ways, right? It can be job set managing everything, or it can be job set delegating creation of pod groups. It gets more tricky when you have three levels, right? Because then and if you have like multiple instances of every level, because there's like no way, for example, for the train job,
disaggregated worker set, is that the one that's 3 levels at the moment?
it might be, but the train job is like 3 levels, right? Because train job, it creates like job sets, and job set has already like 2 levels, right? And in that case, like train job, if you want to have like different settings, like per different like pod groups, and there will be like multiple of them, then basically there's like, or like jobs here, there's like no way for the train job to actually do that, because like this is in a way abstracted by job set, right? It has like no control of like, yeah. So we had this discussion with Andre, but I would say for the idea is like, and that's also what's written in the CAP, let's start with something, let's see how it works, and then we can basically generalize this, right? So whatever is probably better for you as the job set maintainers, easier. Maybe there are other reasons, so let's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll need help from the Google side, at least for me. Yeah, I don't know for the topology aware, like if we need the like I'm imagining, I think replica, like TAS per replica, or it'd be more like each replica needs to point to a different node pool. And that's like the use case, but I don't know like what that API should look like. I also don't know if like it might be kind of complicated, because like if each node pool is going to be a different, like if you want that specified like a different rack or something, or they should all be the same rack, I don't know, because like that gets kind of, I think it gets more complicated, because you would need to have some kind of ID for this information, which I don't necessarily know how we would express that in an API at the moment. So I'm okay to kind of defer that one, because I don't.
Yeah, so like let's have a discussion on CAP, because we should probably like write it down, and what we need for TPUs, because this is kind of, I think, complex to explain. There are like multiple cases, and I know that with like multi-slice, there is like cleaner solution to have like job per pod group, but on the other hand, people are already like using with Q it in a way that a single job actually maps to like multiple slices, and so like backward compatibility is also important. Like so let's have discussion on the CAP. Like that's great start. So Kevin, just to make sure, like my questions, I understand. So what you describe is, because we don't have these building blocks ready yet, right? You use the pod group structs, which are more or less the same right now. I think the only difference is the gang scheduling min count, which will be a pointer in the building blocks, so you can leave it unset and default it.
Yeah.
Right.
So
okay.
That's
clever.
Hope,
like to yeah.
Well, my hope for all of this is I want to prove out this work, and
yeah, that's great. Like great idea, and
like
the
I
other
don't
thing, like.
And
Sorry,
like my goal is in 1.37, like once this kind of, like I'm gonna build from Kubernetes latest main, kind of be sort of QAing, if you will, a lot of this work, and make sure we kind of prove out these things. I'm open, like I think we won't merge this until 1.37 is released anyway, so I'm definitely envisioning us to switch to the workload builder.
Perfect.
And I just wanted to kind of get this proved out. I had free time this week to kind of play around with it.
as I said, that's a really clever idea, because for prototyping we can just reuse the structs that we have right now. And also, like the follow-up question. So right now we are not using CPG, and you are just modeling job set maps like a set of, or like slice of pod groups. Okay, but like we want to use CPG, right? Because I can envision that. Like if we want to
So
have
are
gang of
we?
gangs, or
Yeah.
That is an area I haven't looked as much into. I didn't review that one, but yeah, I imagine we probably would want to use CPG, but I have to.
Okay.
Yeah, because I guess for us, the replicated jobs, they can be separate pod groups entirely. That's one thing I always
Yes.
thought, but
Like,
yeah.
so in that case, like a job would map to a pod group, and like replicated job, or like the whole job set would map to a CPG, right? And then we can express like some gang stuff like that, right? If we want. And that's okay.
Yeah, but I think the CPG, I definitely think it makes a lot more sense from the disaggregated worker set and other things there too.
So yeah, actually, so in this one I have another follow-up. We actually have a use cases how people run reinforcement learning with train job today. And we have a use cases when people want to do disaggregated rollouts when you separate inference from training. And behind the scenes, we like the customers using job sets. So I would imagine we will have more use cases when CPG become useful when you want to preempt your inference workload outside of your training when you do policy updates, which means like we might want to ensure API is extensible enough to support those RL use cases as well. We can bring them in, but I think for now, the question is like how we make sure API is extensible, right? So we don't really break it, Kevin. In case like we need to support CPG and disaggregated use cases with job set also.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I guess, yeah, I haven't thought, I mean, so for CPG, the idea would be that leader, like basically multiple replicated jobs would be considered like a sub gang and preempted together. While in our case, we have like right now in our API, we just have pod group per job. But what we want is like multiple replicated jobs to be considered a gang. Is that kind of the core
Yeah, so
idea of CPG?
yeah, like we can imagine like, you might have an inference and training workload within a single job set. And no, those inference workload can be represented as two replicated job. And together they can they can be composed and they can be, combined in a composition, but they can be preempted separately, similar to, disaggregated set with the, with leader worker set, right? But this is more in the batch inference use cases for like, RL. Yeah, so we need to really think on this in terms of, because CPG definitely will become useful for preemption and placement. Yeah.
I totally agree, and I like, even if we don't have, or like the use cases that we have right now in mind are only hypothetical, but like the one Andre said, I think is a good one, right? It's not hypothetical. Then still, like for sake of making our lives easier in the future, I'm pretty sure eventually we want to have like CPG, right? And like as long as we're in alpha with this integration, then maybe that's fine. But if in the like unfortunate event, like we went to beta with just flat pod groups and then we want to migrate to CPG, that will be like painful to that in backward compatible way, right? Because you will have already some running workloads creating pod groups and migrating them to composite pod group. This will either mean like some mess in the API, or like some backward incompatible change in the runtime. So yeah. So like especially in 137, we should have everything that we need. So both CPG and the workload builder. So I would like really recommend to start like right away from the beginning.
Yeah, that's my plan. And yeah, I did forgot as I was playing around with this, I ran into an issue with Elastic job sets where I was thinking that because obviously we know that the job controller does not right now, it doesn't support mutable pod groups, or maybe I don't know if that merged
But it
yet.
will. Heba is working on that right now as a part of the workload builder.
Yeah.
It's in progress.
But so for now, what I thought I could do is just disable the gang scheduling for jobs and just have job set kind of like orchestrate that. But then I was finding that the Elastic, like I still can't scale up or down jobs if the generic workload feature gate is enabled. And so I filed an issue there. I don't know if that will be fixed as part of some of the work, but I have an issue in a PR kind of relaxing that one because like that's the one thing I found that like I can't support Elastic job sets at all right now because I get a validation error in the job if the workload API is enabled. So that was just a bug I found. I filed an issue on it. I don't know if it will be redundant.
Yeah, but like that will be fixed, right? Because that was the hack that we did for the alpha integration in 136 for the job integration, right? So basically, if you enable the workload integration in job, then and the job is eligible for gang scheduling, then we disable ability to change the parallelism, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
So
I mean,
this will like now we'll do it properly. So now we'll allow like changing parallelism and setting min count. So this will be fixed. Like if that's the problem you hit. Like if it's something else, then
yeah, I guess in my case, what I was thinking I actually have to check. I think I was assuming I would recreate the pod groups or the workloads for a job set anyway, and so like I'm getting away with the fact that they're not immutable. But the problem is that.
But then we have like finalizers, right? So we are also removing finalizers or something like that, or like.
Yeah,
or like recreating. Oh, you are recreating the job altogether. That's the idea, or
I have to check again. But at least, yeah, because like the Elastic job set, I think we patched the job, or we patched the job to change the parallelism, and I think I was kind of treating it like a resuspend, where I would delete the pod group and then recreate a new one with the new min count. But,
I see. So that's a hack. Like, but for that, we already have a finalizer, so you won't be able to delete pod group as long as some pods exist. You can work around that by deleting the finalizer, but
anyway,
you can just wait like 1 more week or 2, and hopefully we'll have this like have us PR in, and this will be fixed, right? So we'll be able to change the parallelism and change the min count.
Yeah. Yeah, we can see. I'll make sure to play around with that one. Yeah. Yeah, because
okay,
I wasn't.
That's great. That's exciting. And last question, like, do you get any feedback? Did you get any feedback from the job set community, like which API path is better, like the one with this replicated, like target? What was the name? Target replicated job policy, or just doing some? Yeah.
We have a pretty small community, so
Okay.
I think that is pretty much this call or Q call. I mean, I have not heard very much from people.
So I think the one key difference is if we don't want to use this target replicated job scheduling policy, whatever, and we just want to rely on the existing fields in the job API to express like the job level scheduling policy, then you create the dependency, right? We need to have job integration first supporting the scheduling policy.
Yeah, that was, I guess, what Q was kind of saying is, from my understanding, Q has 2 use cases for job set where job sets are emitted altogether, and then they actually have job set creates Q workloads per job, and the emission is done. So you would have multiple workloads being emitted for Q, and they were bringing up the use case of whether or not, like, how can we turn off the gang scheduling at the job set level but enable it at the job level, which was something that I think we were kind of not wanting to support because of the owner references, from what I remember. Because like I haven't, once the job controller work merges, I could play around with what it would look like if job set, or if we have gang scheduling at job set top level, and then we also have the scheduling specs specified in the job, at the job level, like how we actually want that to behave. I was thinking we would forbid it, honestly, but maybe we don't want to.
Yeah. Like we can continue discussion on the cap. As I said, like this dependency is just something to think about, because it might happen that in the job set you will love that, you will want to move to beta to GA, right? But as long as like the job integration stays in alpha for some reason, like I hope not, right? But still, like once you have this dependency, you're kind of on the same train, right? And you won't be able to move forward with job set without job moving forward. So that just I think to consider, right? But yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'll have to think about the nested level because I was thinking I always thought our vision was going to be the top level kind of owns this, but it sounds like we're kind of going back on that decision a
Yeah,
little bit.
I think we need like unless we go with this replicated target replicated job policy, right? In that case, we can express everything on a single root level, and that has like benefits that like it's completely independent of what job is doing. On the other hand, job is also adding those fields, so we'll have like both of them, right? Eventually, and we
Yeah, it's kind
also,
of
but
it's sort of what Jordan was, I think, or not. I think that was what Tim was sort of bringing up, the whole Russian doll architecture of
that's
our
true.
API.
But you know,
I mean,
that's
it's
a
fine.
trade-off, right? Yeah, we need to pick something, and I guess like in the latter we can like
But
work around with validation or maybe like eventually unify.
don't we have the same problem with failure policies? And we decided that the root, job set controller will decide on failure policies.
No, I think we allow both.
So failure
And-
policy can be used with the pod failure policy, right?
Yes, and then actually we want them to work together. There's a KEP we have that somebody's going to take up to kind of change it so that to make it a little bit easier to work with job set and job pod failure policies. Because like we want the ability to restart a job set based off of certain conditions of the pod failure policy. So our goal was to kind of have them sort of build off of one another. But yeah, think about the nested gang approach. And I'm hoping to kind of just keep playing around with what's going in 1.37 and follow this work. And then there are a lot of changes in the KEP and the PR. Part of what I want from Q, we already have a suite running WAS end to end, and I kind of want to do something similar for job set and maybe start at least having a good playground for testing out these ideas. Anyway, I think I took off enough time. I know we have another item on the agenda. If there's nothing else, we can probably get to that one.
The key ideas, right? So please go ahead with that because the other thing, it will be just the progress. So we can have just 10 minutes for the progress, hopefully.
Yeah, I guess I mean, I don't have too much more. I mean, I can just kind of show maybe a little bit more of the KEP.
Oh, you're muted, Kevin.
Sorry, I am. Let me go ahead and I'll just share kind of the KEP and then get. Yeah, and this was definitely thrown together today, so I imagine we'll change it quite a bit. But yeah, I wanted to kind of at least some of the design decisions that I was making, similar to I mentioned the policy.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, topology kind of there are and so these things are pretty explanatory. Definitely trying to think through like how do we turn this off, and I think it makes sense that if we don't specify the scheduling field, we would just assume that it's not gang scheduled. I guess this does bring up a good point about if you don't specify the spec but you specify it at the job level, maybe that's something we want to support. But that can also be dependent on having job support it. This is a simple one. The one that we have a lot of use cases for job sets where we want the ability to change a lot of the things when a job is suspended. So one thing I was making sure is that like if a job set is suspended, there's no workload or pod groups created because like there's some use case in the Kubeflow community to kind of it's more about patching resources, but I could imagine a world where we patch the parallelism or the completions or even the replicas while a job is suspended. So I would prefer that suspend means that we don't create the workload or pod groups, and then when you resume the controller will create those once the scheduling is being registered. I think that makes sense to me. It's kind of similar to how suspend works with pods anyway.
So like, could you explain how suspend works with pods? Like
We
if I
don't
have a running job set and I suspend it, does it mean the pods are?
it deletes the pods.
Okay, so in that case, everything should work, right? Because if you don't have pods, then you can like delete the pod groups and recreate them. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly kind of what I was thinking is that, yeah, because like one of our use cases we have from the Kubeflow is an idea that you can right size your resources based off some external service. And we want to say when it's suspended, you're free to change stuff like the replicas. And at least like we don't want you to change the shape of the job set, like add workers or remove workers, but we want the ability to change resources or replicas of the pods. So that's one reason why we have the suspend, so that, well, that's a use case we want to use for suspend. So that was something I want to make sure was there. Depends on is kind of a tricky one. I think Andre's dropped, so I'll talk to him a little bit more about this one. But yeah, I'm trying to think through like if we have, sorry, depends on is this idea that I have a job set and I only want the workers to, basically the driver has to be ready before I continue on for the workers. This probably means that this actually, I need to update this API. I'm thinking that we can't really have a top level gang if you have a depends on field, because we would hit a deadlock. Like the driver, we cannot schedule the driver and the workers together if we're waiting for the drivers to be ready. So I think I'm thinking, sorry, go on.
But I think in that case, like CPG is the answer, right? In a way, like depends what you want to achieve, but because you still want to have like driver and workers scheduled as a gang, right? So workers are gang, and yeah. So then if you have like policy on multiple levels, like what CPG allows, then you can somehow do it. So basically, you have basic policy at the root, right, and gang policy below for workers. So yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess that is something I have to think through a bit more. But yeah, I guess I was just thinking about, yeah, because at the I would have it at the replicated job policy level. So like I would basically forbid a top level gang and then have you specify that one. But yeah, I guess in this case it would be the driver schedules first and then the workers. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I can see now why CPG would matter, because maybe we definitely probably want stuff like if the driver is preempted, we would need the workers to be preempted.
So then you can model that with CPG, right? Because you can have CPG with policy basic, but the disruption mode can be all. So basically, if you disrupt everything, right? So
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I'll have to think more about that one. Yeah, and then elastic jobs. This is kind of at least what we were thinking. I think this comes from Elastic PyTorch, where we are actually changing the parallelism and completions of a job. And yeah, that's obviously these are just all the same use cases. But yeah, and so basically what I had, and like what I did take, I think it was option 2 was the one I ended up going with. But yeah, the policy constraints and disruption can be top level, and then we kind of have a nested for the replicated jobs, sort of allow you to tune it per all the replicated jobs. But anyway, we can continue on the KEP. Please feel free. Yeah, I'm still getting I have the implementation of this also up. It's going to be kind of noisy because I'm still trying to figure out how to get everything to build correctly. And I want the CI I want to have an end-to-end test for WAS, but it's based off 1.37 APIs. So I'm fiddling with kind and other stuff to actually build this stuff in the CI, but it's at least working locally. I'll figure out how to get it with Prow, but at least, yeah, I want to prove all this out. But yeah,
that is perfect. Like, thank you so much, Kevin. I really love that, and to be honest, I think we need that. We need this job set integration, because in order in 138 to go to beta with the workload builder and the CPG, we need like some integration, right? And I think job set is just ideal because we can do like both with just one integration. Also, I think makes sense for the job set users, like all those.
Yeah, and my motivation for this now is also I'm trying to think about how this would work with Q. So in the slides, I also kind of been thinking about like the queues pod group integration, and also what it means. Like my goal would be, if we have the spec, I would like that if we have this job spec, we should have that queue should be able to translate that into its own workload object, so we can match both the what the scheduler expects and what queue wants for a mission. So that's kind of what I was presenting at working group batch, was kind of the plan for what we're doing, and also trying to think about how this should all kind of work together over time. Because I do think we have to kind of converge a little bit, but it's gonna be fun with alpha alpha APIs and all the changes that are going on. But I think there are some functionality that we're adding, especially the pod groups, sorry, DRA pod groups, which we don't really have a counterpoint in queue right now. So I think there will have to be definitely some use cases. But anyway, yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Actually, it will be great if you had any blocker in queue, especially for the, like backward compatibility. We would like to know that. So to take it into our consideration, or, like if you have any ideas about that, because this concerns me a lot, that what we are doing now or building now in Cube Scheduler can affect the current queue.
Yeah. The area that I'm still trying to think about is queues workload priority class, and how that will translate to WAS preemption. That's one that I think we will need changes in queue to respect. I need to think more about that one. Q has its own way of doing it. Like, I can actually show it. So I wasn't. Yeah, I, mean, I guess this group does care about Q, so I can show you another thing I presented at was so for Q, Q has this concept of pod groups, because Q basically we find users don't necessarily use workload controllers for all of their quote unquote workloads. So Q has a pod controller integration where allow you to you can create pods, and then there's labels on the pods where you can kind of say I'm a part of a group. I think that it'd be nice to kind of translate a lot of this into a WAS pod group, and this kind of is another like sort of I'm trying to think through like how, like, I mean, this is relatively simple. The idea is we just expand an annotation to say, like, I know I'm a part of a pod group. I know my size. So then I had a change in queue where in the pod group controller, I just create the WAS pod group and kind of make sure I can specify the count. And then this is at least an area that I'm thinking could be a nice way to get this, but there is a challenge here, is that the leader worker set integration for Q does leverage this pod group integration. And I have to think through a little bit more of that one, because I also don't know if I really want, like, these APIs are like the WAS APIs are relatively complicated, and I don't know if we can really express that at annotations at the pod level. But I'm still trying to work through a lot of this one, because like I don't know if for the queues pod groups, if we would want this stuff to all be, I guess Q basically handles preemption all or nothing. I think we were hoping to get partial preemption, but I don't know how far we've gotten there. So that is something I'm trying to think through. What else did I have? Yeah, and so for Q, that's the main one that I've been thinking about. I have to think a little bit more about workload aware preemption. Is definitely the one that I think we need some work in Q, because I don't we have a workload priority class, which is a cluster scoped resource that workloads can use, and that determines preemption, and Q preempts all or nothing. But then WAS has it done through priority classes. And there is an integration where you can kind of have the workload priority class respect priority classes from scheduler, but it has to be at the pod level, and it's not at the pod group level. So I think that's like the one change we'd have to make, is how to get the workload priority class to respect pod groups when maybe they're potentially not on the pod anymore. But that's something I think we can easily discuss. But I think over time I want to kind of get started on some of this work for Q, because we're having some discussions about which TAS do we want to go with. Do we want to go with the entry Kubernetes one, or do we want to go with Q? And so I'm like really hoping we don't have this world where we have Q APIs for all this, and then we have the scheduler APIs that are completely different. So that's something I'm hoping to kind of avoid going forward. But
that is great. But Kevin, are you aware of the Pavel's talk about the strategy for Q and WAS integration? I also see we have Pavel also. Okay, yeah.
And that was actually brought up in the call. I do remember reading that. That got me thinking a lot about, like the pod groups. There's also the concept of wait for pods ready. And there's a lot of APIs in Q that kind of predate this that we have to kind of think through. I know the other work that's ongoing is somebody on my team has built we have the scheduler library that I think is being led by sig-scheduling, and there is work being done in Q, and I guess that's to kind of bridge the gap for TAS. But then I noticed that no one was really thinking about the what's going to happen with workloads control gang scheduling, and so that's something that I wanted to kind of play around with and start thinking about how this would work with Q, because I always thought, if the workload controllers are handling this, then it should be somewhat seamless, as long as we can have Q be aware of the specs for scheduling. But we first have to get these APIs into the workload APIs. So it's kind of a long road, but that's at least kind of what I wanted to kind of prove out the plan.
Yeah. Emmy, you have a question?
Oh, yeah. Kevin was mentioning the difference between Kubernetes scheduler TAS and then also Q TAS. But I was wondering, what are the plans for the initial implementations for the Kubernetes scheduler TAS? Is it going to start off being limited to required placement? In contrast, Q has preferred and then unconstrained as other options.
Yes, so we are starting with just required, and we would like to add this preferred topology, but that will be the next release. But that's not the only. Oh, Pavel raised his hand, so probably he's better to explain.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
So basically, we already have task implementation in 1.36. And we will be adding new features with subsequent releases. So in 1.37 we are working on supporting multiple levels of grouping for the workloads, which should also support tasks. So this will also support only required constraints, but you will be able to represent, for instance, what's supported for a job set in Q, where you can have different constraints on the job set level and different constraint on a job level. So with the multi-level tasks, we should bridge this gap. In my mind, the optional or preferred constraints is the next feature to be added to tasks. So we are fully aware of the task features in Q, and we want to bridge the gap in in the upcoming Kubernetes releases.
Makes sense. I have a dumb question. Is how I know like workload aware workload and Pygers and things like that are all in alpha. Are you guys using it in production on your end? I'm just like wondering how production ready you feel like these APIs sort of are. Because I'm asking uh like outside of Q, which is like mostly for training for our use cases, if just the workload, like the Kubernetes workload is like ready for like inference for production yet. I'm just curious if like you guys are using it in prod.
So no one really uses alpha features. That's the reality, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm just yeah.
But we are going to beta.
Depends, yeah, team to team. Okay, cool.
We are going to beta in 137 with like gang scheduling, with workload-aware preemption, hopefully also with tasks, like these basic tasks. So I guess 137 will be when the real like adoption starts, right? And that's really exciting because we are also like looking for the feedback in like some strategy discussion, like what to prioritize next, like where to focus on, etc. So yeah.
So for Google, I mean, even for us at OpenShift, beta APIs, like our Kubernetes has them off by default. And something I want to try and make sure, what I'm hoping to push for is for 1.37, like I would like to have like a public preview for workload aware scheduling on these clusters. I was wondering, because like I do hear some feedback for like cloud people using cloud vendors, you don't usually expose these APIs until they're GA. Like, is Google planning to kind of have this enabled early? Or I don't know if you've always enabled beta APIs or what.
No, but yeah, we really would like to enable this for some customers. We are like maybe not for everyone, but like for some, and as I said, like gather some feedback. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've been telling my team or my management chain is like I think this is gonna be fast tracked basically.
Yeah, like
we're not
also like the plan is like to go to GN in 138, right? Because like exactly for this reason that like staying in beta doesn't give us anything because people will not start using this new API until it's GA. It's different when you're adding new field, right? Which is like enabled by default, and then like staying in beta actually gets you like some like feedback data, right? So, but yeah, like right now the plan is to in 138 to go to GA. So yeah, like to have it available for everyone. And
So what are the months? What does that mean in months? For like what are we looking for beta and then for GA? Like just an estimate. I'm just curious.
1.38 will be end of the year.
Yes.
1.30. So that's GA or beta?
GA.
GA. Okay, and then beta is which month?
That's release.
And then
right?
when? Oh, okay.
August,
so when is
probably.
that one cut?
It's like next month, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
1 month and a half, something like that. It will be cut.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So it's all
Let's hope.
very ambitious.
Let's hope for that. Yeah.
And Amy, to answer your question about inference, I'm not involved there, but there is a separate KEP that people are doing on the leader worker set side that you could check out, and they do call out. There's a leader worker set, and then there's a new API from the leader worker set community called disaggregated worker set for basically pre-fill decode, and they are well aware of all this work, and they are kind of doing an equivalent kind of work with this group. And they do require the composite pod group because they have a lot more. They definitely want more of the gang scheduling of the pre-fill decoder and much more control over the preemptions.
That makes sense. I don't know if this group knows, so maybe I need to go to CNCF, but is like Grove and Dynamo, do you know if they're like plugged into like the Kubernetes scheduler workload work? Like, is Grove going to use it? Do you know?
They gave the use cases. Sorry, go on, Matt.
Yeah, we had a discussion with them, but it was like a couple of months ago, and we also met with some of the people from Grove during the last KubeCon and the last summit. Overall, I need to open my notes to remember like what was the conclusion there, but that's like that's a work for the future, right? Because Growth works a bit differently. It's both like workload orchestrator, right? That gives you ability to express like some of those scheduling concepts, and like eventually we need to expose like proper APIs on the core scheduler so Growth can start using them. But basically that's the more or less story there, right? So it's not like we need I don't know, they will like integrate some of those APIs into their APIs. Like that's not the case, right? That's different.
I mean, you can also kind of like separate Dynamo into like like similar layers of like what we do for Qt, right? Like, yes, they do have like a more generalized configuration that that expresses more and like needs to like piece together like I guess they consider it like a more like cohesive API, I guess. But like Grove is still an operator type that's like backed by something like Kai, right? If they need that sort of like higher level queuing semantic. So that's why I was sort of just like wondering because there could be places for integration there. But yeah, like Kai for them is like a wholesale scheduler replacement versus like the other paradigm where we have Kubernetes scheduler, queue, and then whatever operator types you want to layer on top.
Yeah, but as I said, if I remember correctly, for Growth, they can be viewed like above orchestrator and scheduler, and they have like this intermediate podgang API, right? That is basically consumed by some other schedulers like Kai or could be also it could be like also a translation layer from podgang to workload. So then it can work with like the kube scheduler, right? But we are not working actively on that, but probably we will like in the future, like I will, yeah. So.
Yeah, I was just curious. Like eventually, as an example, I don't have enough cycles, but that's it. Once we get enough staff, it would be cool to have Grove backed by Q as an example. So like that would be able to like offer an integration point there. But yeah, I need to dig into it a bit more when I have more cycles.
Yeah, I think I know Amy, you and I did talk with them, and they did mention that they have a lot of, I think they have like a scheduler like provider where they kind of allow you to use like Volcano
Yeah.
or Kai, or I think they were talking about Q. And then they did mention workload-aware scheduling as another integration point. So I think that they would probably have some translations to like pod groups and workloads down the road. I don't know if I haven't really followed up with Kai on this one in a while. So I asked like 6 months ago what they were planning on. Haven't heard much. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
like there's sort of a lot of these people, we all kind of did gang scheduling one way. So we're kind of having to sort of reconcile that. And I know Kai, yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I haven't thought about like with Kai, because Kai does add support for job set and other stuff, and I haven't really thought about like what it would look like for Kai, but I will hear something if I break them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I will probably open up that conversation again. But I think everyone's kind of waiting for this stuff to stabilize a little bit too.
Yeah.
That seems to be what the approach a lot of people are doing, is wait for the alpha to go beta. Maybe eventually let it GA, and then we can figure out how the dust settles.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Amy. So, Matt, a question for you related to CPG. What is the progress for this API?
For the CPG?
Yeah.
So we are making progress. As I said, like it's a difficult implementation because essentially CPG touches all the places where we support pod groups. We now have these multi-level pod groups.
Yeah.
I think the most difficult part was actually to generalizing the scheduling queue to support composite pod groups and like the hierarchies. And I think we are almost there. So the third PR around that was submitted today, which I think means now the main PR for CPG, the API, and the core implementation of multi-level gang scheduling can be now reviewed and hopefully like submitted next week if everything goes well. So
yeah, I'm asking because as you know, it's like we need to implement CPG in multiple
I
places.
know, like yes,
Yeah.
yes,
So
yes.
yeah,
I'm aware of that. We are doing like whatever we can.
Yeah.
As I said, it's complex, but we are making progress, and hopefully, like next week, we'll have the API submitted.
Yeah, the API is the most important thing. I know it.
And then we'll have like 2 follow-up PRs because CPG also has like support for preemption and for the topology, but we'll be tackling these like separate PRs. So adding the topology-related fields to CPG and preemption-related fields to CPG with the implementation. So right now we are focusing on the core gang scheduling, but once we have that, like the others should be much easier to implement, right? Because as I said, the main difficulty is about rewriting the whole queuing and also like part of scheduling framework to basically support these composite pod groups, right? And like multi-level pod groups. So
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So I think this is the progress for CGB about the tasks for beta. We have all the bits and pieces that require tasks to be on beta, but the API, like pumping the API PR is not there yet, and I believe we can just wait for other APIs to get merged, and then we can. I'm not sure. What do you think? Do you think we should have the API for review right now?
So we have Antoni on the call as well, right? Antoni started or like will start creating a PR for the beta promotion API.
Yeah, I think have already shown that like a minute ago or something like that. Yeah, it's work in progress right now. But
the question is like, do we want to have the task fields there as well, or will we send like a separate PR? Probably separate might be better.
So this basically this PR has the TAS like pumping the TAS as well for beta, or we need a separate PR?
I think like like this is my opinion, but I think this should be done separately, not to mix 2 different caps in a single pull request.
Okay, so this one will be basically beta graduation of gang scheduling and preemption, because we decided to bundle them together, right? It doesn't make sense to promote one without the other. Okay, that makes sense. And then we'll have like a follow, like next one will be for tasks.
So I will have a PR on top of this one to pump the TAS just to get it in review, like in the backlog for the API reviews.
Yeah, but bear in mind that is still work in progress. Like some tests are not still working, so I'll get back to it tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. So this is the TAS. There was, I believe, CGB and preemptions. Is there any blocker, anything that we need to discuss?
So I don't know. Like I think we are making progress on all fronts. Like CPG is the most difficult one, the most complex. Probably preemption is the second one, but I think there we are close. Likely, like next week we'll be almost ready with everything. But yeah.
For the integration, I will just talk about the workload builder and the job. The workload builder APIs and the library itself, they are already in review. Matt reviewed them once, but to be able to get them, and we need to integrate it with the job and make sure that everything is working fine in one PR. And this is what I'm working on right now, to hook the library that we created with the job controller and making sure it is working. The PR, the full PR should be ready hopefully today or tomorrow. This is the progress for the integration for the job and the workload builder. Yeah, I think that's it. Anything else? Anyone wanted to share anything with us? If not, so yeah, thank you so much. See you in the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.